If we talk about Jurassic Park, probably any of the movies out there come to mind. However, not many people seem to know that these movies are based on the story written by Michael Crichton, one of the most prolific writers of science fiction. His story enamored an entire generation because it has it all: a plot full of mysteries, terror, and charismatic characters. But above all this, there is a critical message about the hand of man in nature. The first film directed by Spielberg is a true marvel, with an impeccable production that completely surprised the world during its premiere. Spielberg's adaptation of Crichton's story was intended for the general public, since it was a film that everyone in the family could go to see, unlike the original novel, which is much darker and more graphic than what was allowed to be shown at the time. A very clear example of this occurs in a scene that was totally cut for the movie. The book says that it was a rainy night, and in a clinic there was a nurse taking care of a mother and her newborn baby. Suddenly, amidst the darkness and the sound of rain, the nurse hears a strange noise which she mistakes for a bird and does not take it seriously. However, the nurse went to visit the baby and witnessed a terrifying scene. In the crib were two dinosaurs on top of the baby eating its face. The health worker was horrified when the dinosaurs turned and looked her straight in the eyes as they opened their blood-filled snouts. They were not bothered by her presence, as they already had what they wanted. Those who have read the books feel that Spielberg lowered the bar too much in terms of science fiction, ethical issues, and messages, but more importantly, he omits many of the most disturbing moments the story has to offer. Crichton's books could well be considered horror, and no wonder, as the prologue tells the story of a worker who is seriously injured after being crushed by a bulldozer. When he goes to a doctor, she realizes that the wounds do not seem to come from an engine in the ground. There is no dirt in the wound, and there are no crushed bones, but rather it looks like shredded flesh, almost like an animal mutilated by a predator's attack. This is how the book raises the possibility of unknown creatures, almost as if they were not dinosaurs, but something else. Recently, more people have become interested in the books and the original story, creating several analog horror videos about Jurassic Park and some of the things that were left out of the movies or making them more faithful to the book. Most of these videos try to recreate a found footage scene, in which we see security cameras, audios that were recorded by park employees in their last moments, or instructional videos of what to do in case you are in front of a dinosaur. For anyone who has not read the books, these videos may seem like yet another creepypasta created from a franchise as popular as Jurassic Park. But what they try to do is to reflect the danger posed by the animals found there, as well as the precautions taken in the park and the horrible deaths that could happen to the most unfortunate. One scene that exemplifies how dark the book can be in contrast to the movie is the death of Dennis Nedry, a programmer who was in charge of the park's operating systems. In the book, after getting out of his Jeep during the storm, Nedry hears a bird-like gurgle coming from the jungle thicket. At first, he thinks it is an owl, but as he heads back to the car, he hears a rustling sound in the thicket, as if a large animal is slowly approaching towards him. Nedry then starts to run towards the car. Once near the car, he stops. The animal had reached the car before him, but it was standing still. Nedry didn't know which dinosaur in the park it was, as he was just a computer scientist. The animal was quite large and had a V-shaped crest on its head. Nedry waits watching the animal, thinking that the car's lights scare it, and that's why it doesn't come any closer. But that's when Nedry feels an impact on his chest. Nedry touches it with his hand and realizes that it was saliva. The dinosaur had spit it out. Seconds later, he felt a second impact, but this time on his neck. Nedry opens the car door, ready to get the hell out of there. But it is when he turns his head to take a last look at the dinosaur that he feels a third impact in his eyes. He feels as if nails had been driven into the back of his skull, and he falls to his knees, screaming. The earth shook beneath him, and despite the pain, he struggled to open his eyes, and yet he saw nothing but dots against a black background. Nedry slowly understood the truth. He was blind. When Nedry managed to steady himself, he staggered towards the car, leaning against the side panel, as a wave of nausea and vertigo enveloped him. The dinosaur was near. Nedry could now feel it approaching. He was dimly aware of the animal's panting, but he could see nothing, and his terror was extreme. He stretched out his hands, waving in all directions to avoid the attack he knew had to come. Then he felt a new burning pain as if he had a knife of fire in his belly. Nedry touched his body, looking for the lower part of his body to touch the torn end of his shirt. And then a thick, slippery mass that was surprisingly warm. With horror, he suddenly realized that he was holding his own intestines. The dinosaur had opened his stomach. Nedry fell to the ground and landed on something scaly and cold. It was the animal's leg. And then he felt a new pain on both sides of his head. The pain became more intense, and as he was lifted to his feet, he knew that the dinosaur had taken his head between its jaws. And the horror of that realization was followed by a final wish that it would all be over soon. While in the book, this is all too detailed and overwhelming. In the movie, Nedry also dies at the hands of the Dilophosaurus, but the scene is much more censored, apart from the fact that it has a certain humorous touch, since in the movie, Nedry acts as a comic character, when in the book, he is a computer scientist with a totally serious character, as are all the staff of the park. While in the movie, we see them as very carefree and irresponsible people. In the book, they are all quite competent. As the park is forced to open earlier than they assumed, the staff knows the risk involved in walking around the park facilities blindly, plus all the flaws that were in the park. But John Hammond wants his park to start making money as soon as possible. Another important change is that of Dr. Henry Wu, who gave life to the park. In the movie, he appears in only one scene. While in the book, he is a very important character, since at the beginning, he considers his work as a natural progress of genetic science. But as the plot progresses, he begins to realize the risk that these animals pose, being afraid of his own creations, mentioning that perhaps he should have created them with different characteristics, such as making the dinosaurs slower or disabling them in a way. One of the parts that causes the most horror in the first book is how they realize that the dinosaurs are reproducing. On the trip with the Jeep through the park, Timmy sees a small velociraptor in an enclosure that should not be his. Dr. Wu says that this is impossible, since the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park have been created and genetically modified to be females, and that they cannot reproduce. It is then, when in the central computers of the park all the screens begin to blink, the staff discovers that the park sensors have detected many more dinosaurs than there should be in different enclosures. It seems that especially the velociraptors have been moving freely throughout the park without anyone noticing. The reason why no one from the park's command post has raised the alarm is that the console always marked the exact number of dinosaurs created, so it always appeared as full. But no one asked for a higher number than the established one. But the reason for the reproduction of the dinosaurs, as well as the origin of the most disturbing aspect of this story, is the result of Dr. Wu and his group of geneticists. In the visit to the recreation center, they explain that the DNA of the dinosaurs extracted from the mosquitoes in the amber is incomplete, and that they have had to fill in these DNA gaps using genes from other organisms, both in the book and the movies. Alan Grant makes the connection between the DNA of amphibians and the reproduction of the dinosaurs in the park, since several species of amphibians can change sex with hormonal changes, allowing them to reproduce. Another consequence of the amphibian genes is that some dinosaurs in the park have motion-based vision, like the T-Rex. In the movie, Alan mentions that the real Tyrannosaurus's vision is based on motion, but this doesn't make sense in reality, as tyrannosaurs should have excellent vision as their binocular beaded skulls demonstrate. In the book, Alan Grant is surprised when he realizes that the Tyrannosaurus cannot see him when he is still. Although the animal knows he is around and roars trying to scare Alan into moving so he can see him, it is then when Alan realizes that some species in the park, as is the case, the Tyrannosaurus has a significant percentage of frog DNA, and just like the frogs will not be able to detect him unless he makes a sudden movement. What is truly terrifying is that the geneticists have not only used amphibian DNA to complete their creations, but have used all types of DNA, resulting in creatures with unique abilities, making the island become a real nightmare for those who are there. This leads the characters in the play to question whether they can really be called dinosaurs, as dinosaurs have been extinct long before man made his way in. So how can we know if the cloning that took place in the park was really successful? An example of this are the velociraptors, who possess high physical and mental dexterity. The scientists in charge of the park already knew that velociraptors were intelligent, but not to the extent of planning complex traps, as is the case of the trap at the visitor center, where paleobotanist Ellie Sattler is distracting a pair of velociraptors through a gate to allow the others to go to restore the electric current. But it is then when Henry Wu, who is watching it all from the balcony, realizes that it is actually the raptors that are distracting Ellie. That it is all a trap, and it is when he goes out to tell Ellie to go back into the building that a third raptor drops from the roof onto Dr. Wu and begins to gut him, using its curved claws like butcher knives while Wu is still alive, watching as the animal pulls out his entrails until he dies. The book has even more disturbing scenes, which only shows why Steven Spielberg decided to omit them for the sake of the movie, because if it had been so explicit and gory, it might not be the franchise it is today.